All right, let's dive right in. We're about to unpack one of the most important and honestly, one of the most haunting phrases in the entire Old Testament. It's the single sentence that basically diagnoses the total collapse of a civilization. And you might be surprised at how loud its echo is in our world today.
And there it is. This is the very last verse of the book of Judges. It's not just thrown in there as an observation. Nope. It's presented as the final damning verdict on an entire era of chaos and crisis. This, the author is telling us, is the reason everything fell apart.
So, what on earth does that actually mean? To really get it, we have to approach this thing like detectives. We're going to investigate it clue by clue, piece by piece, until the full and pretty startling picture comes into focus.
Okay, so before you can understand a diagnosis, you have to look at the patient, right? You have to see the symptoms. And in this case, our patient is an entire society that is in an absolute freefall. The phrase we're looking at, it actually shows up at the beginning and the very end of this one specific section. That's chapters 17 through 21. It acts like these giant bookends around some of the darkest, most disturbing stories you'll find in the entire Bible. So this isn't some abstract philosophical idea. It's a conclusion that's drawn from some truly horrifying events. And look, the author isn't just listing a bunch of random evil acts here. They're laying out the evidence, case file by case file. We see a guy named Micah literally creating his own personal, customized religion, idols and all, and that's immediately followed by a story of such stomach-turning violence that it sparks a brutal civil war. See, the author is showing us the real-world consequences of the core problem. So, now that the chaotic scene is set, let's zoom in. It's time to put the phrase itself under the microscope. We're going to examine the words like a forensic investigator, looking for clues.
In the original Hebrew, the phrase is ish hayashar be'enav yaseh, and its literal meaning is so important. Each person did what was straight or upright in his own eyes. Now, the biggest clue here isn't just what it says, but the intentional, almost sarcastic irony of a single word.
And this just reveals the central tension of the entire book. The Hebrew word for right here is yashar, which means upright or straight. The author uses it with biting irony to show that what seems straight and correct from our tiny human perspective is often completely crooked when you measure it against God's standard. They weren't just doing evil, they were calling it good.
And here's the kicker. This wasn't a society that was just ignorant. They didn't know any better. No way. The author points all the way back to an explicit command from Deuteronomy, where God warned them, do not do whatever seems right in your own eyes. So their actions weren't a mistake. It was a conscious rebellion.
You know, this phrase isn't just a summary of those last few chapters. It's the very engine that drives the book's tragic repeating cycle. It goes like this. Israel abandons God. Then they start doing what's right in their own eyes. And this leads directly to oppression and chaos. So they cry for help, God sends a rescuer, and for a little while there's peace, before the whole cycle starts all over again. And each time, it gets worse. That phrase, it's the root cause of this whole national downward spiral.
All right, now for the next stage of our investigation. Let's look at the first half of the phrase. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Now, this might sound like a simple historical footnote, but it's actually a massive clue to the real problem.
So what does this actually mean? Well, for the original readers, this statement would have hit on two totally different levels. There's the meaning that's right there on the surface, and then there's a much deeper one hiding underneath.
On the surface, it's pretty simple. Historically, Israel didn't have a human king yet. That's true. But the deeper, theological meaning, that's the real point. See, Israel did have a king, God himself. They were supposed to be a theocracy. So the statement is actually a profound accusation. The problem wasn't a lack of government. It was the rejection of the divine ruler they already had. And the author really hammers this point home. The phrase no king in Israel is repeated 4 separate times in this final section. It's not a throwaway line, it's a constant drumbeat, reminding the reader of the core issue. Every time the chaos gets worse, we hear that refrain, there was no king. They had dethroned God from their hearts and from their society. This is the author's central argument in a nutshell. When every single person becomes their own ultimate authority, when they start asking what feels right to me instead of what does God say, well, society just begins to disintegrate. When that objective, divine authority disappears, moral relativism rushes in to fill the void. And believe me, chaos is never far behind. So, with the ancient diagnosis clear, let's bring it home. This is where a story that's thousands of years old suddenly becomes astonishingly modern and speaks right into our own time.
I mean, just think about it for a second. We hear phrases like these all the time in our culture, right? Follow your truth. You do you. Live your own truth. They're presented as these great mantras of personal freedom and empowerment, but they're really just an echo of a very, very old idea. The parallel is just striking, isn't it? The philosophy of follow your truth is basically a modern repackaging of the very same principle that led to total disaster in the Book of Judges. It's the same core idea, just with, better marketing. Ultimately, the story of Judges just lays bare a core spiritual struggle that every single human being faces. It's this constant battle, this tension between our willingness to trust God's revealed wisdom versus our powerful instinct to just trust our own feelings, our own gut, and our own self-justification. The warning here is that the most dangerous decisions we make aren't always the ones that look evil on the surface, but the ones that feel totally reasonable and right to us, while quietly leading us away from God. So this ancient text isn't just some history lesson about them back then. The author holds it up like a mirror, showing us a timeless tendency of the human heart. It's a stark warning about what happens anytime a person or a whole society decides to replace God's authority with its own. And in the end, this ancient diagnosis from the Book of Judges leaves every single one of us with a final, provocative question we have to answer for ourselves. Who or what is the ultimate authority in your life? Who decides what is truly right?